Welcome back to another installment of Direct to Consumer Academy. And today what I want to talk about is how an established brand with an existing direct to consumer channel can improve how that channel performs for them. So there's really two high level pieces that I want to talk about here is number one is the experience that consumer has, and number two, the data, so that you can improve that experience. I mean, it's just those two things, and there's a lot of details underneath both of them, but those are the two things that we really need to focus on. So just to even narrow the scope a little bit more, you might be selling on Amazon. I do not consider, these third-party channels, direct to consumer, for lack of a better word. They're actually selling to the consumer, but they're gaining way more data that you'll never see. So what I'm talking about here is a specific site, an e-commerce site where you can control everything. You can see all the data, and you have control over that customer's experience from end to end. So this is a Shopify store, BigCommerce, Magento, whatever you're running on. Doesn't even matter, homegrown. So I think the first piece of this is, before we get to the experience, is you have all this data, or at least you should, right? At a minimum, you have everything in Google Analytics. And you have data from social media channels based on engagement and what users are doing. So who's looking at that? Is there a specific function and somebody looking at that at least weekly? Ideally, they should be looking at it daily, not saying that they're comparing the daily numbers, the flow from Monday to Thursday. What was the difference of traffic? No. Somebody should have that, though, as a function of their job, whereas every day for a few hours, they're looking at very specific pieces of data and figuring out what they can do to improve. So again, I'll just use Google Analytics. It's one of the biggest packages out there for people to use. And it's once that customer hits your page, what are they doing? What is that path through your site? So I think, the goal is customer hits your site all the way to the other end of they pay you, and then they wait for the box to come to them, right? So analyze that path. If you look at the very first page where customers are hitting, it's probably not going to be your homepage. And if it is, that's probably something you need to review, because you don't want to necessarily drop people right onto your homepage. If you're using a lot of engagement on social media, let's just use an example of an apparel brand that sells to men and women. You shouldn't necessarily be targeting to both genders at the same time and then dropping them both to the homepage and letting them figure out where they should go. Make sure that your engagement is very targeted. So if you are doing advertisements on social media and you're targeting females, make sure that when you drop people into your website, make sure that you're dropping them into some sort of branded page for women. And then let them browse from there. So I think that's one of the first things. I see a lot of people using pay-per-click ads or social media, and they drop right to their homepage. That's not, in my opinion, the best experience of where to drop somebody. That's great if they're surfing around and they need to get back somewhere, or hopefully they remember your brand name and just type in your homepage and they come back. And then that's where they end. That's fine. But when you're doing advertisements, you need to reduce the number of clicks for them to actually give you their credit card information and get that revenue. So again, analyze that path. So ideally, you're sending them to some sort of collection page or category page. So again, if it's apparel, it's the women's page that shows shirts, pants, and boots, right? So then as soon as they land on that page, they see that. However, if your advertisement was for women and it was for a very specific type of boots, skip that page. Go right to women's boots so that they can actually go and then just start filtering. And if it's a new product launch, same idea. Let's drop another page. Let's just drop them. If it's that boot and it's a very new, very specific product and your engagement is very high, drop them right onto that product page, not on your homepage. So make sure that person gets right to that product page. They saw exactly what they wanted to on social media. They end right on that page. They pick a color, they pick a size, add to cart, or maybe even just directly to checkout. And then make sure that experience is very easy for them to check out. I think a lot of times we see that there's drop-off, specifically when buyers are purchasing from mobile phones. If you just expect to accept credit cards on your own site, you need to have all those different payment methods. So whether it's Google Pay, Apple Pay, Amazon Pay, everybody's got their own pay. But PayPal, making sure that all those options are there. You don't know. Every consumer might have different ones. So that's the first piece of data to analyze. And what we just talked through there, if it was a new product launch, we skipped, I think, 3 or 4 pages that a user would have had to click through to get to that new product. So it all depends, but just make sure you're trying to reduce. Always get that customer to exactly where you think that they're looking for as quickly as possible. So that's the first piece. Analyze the path to purchase. So then the second part that kind of leads into that, but a different way to analyze this in Google Analytics, is just go find what pages have your highest bounce rate. So if your highest bounce rate is your homepage, that goes to what I was just saying a little bit earlier, is you're dropping people into a page that's just probably so wide open. Again, unless you have like one product that you sell, maybe that's a little different. But if you have a decent sized catalog, again, we keep talking about apparel, probably have more than one item. Get them as close to where you think that they're interested in from that path that you're bringing them into. So with advertising and social media, you should have a pretty easy way to do that. If they're just searching your brand name, clearly I understand you might not be able to, but in these other channels you should. So find that highest bounce rate and then optimize for that. So if the highest bounce rate is on your product page, which means that people are not clicking add to cart and then putting it into the cart, start analyzing why. There's a lot of different tools that you can install to actually watch where a user's mouse is going, watch what they're clicking, and see what they're doing. And sometimes you can just even watch by their mouse where users are getting frustrated and they're looking for information and they can't find it. So optimize for that bounce rate and keep making sure that the bounce rate is ideally in your checkout, which is the very last step. I mean, ideally that would be where you'd want your highest bounce rate. I mean, clearly everybody wants a 0% bounce rate until they get to the thank you page where they actually paid you. But if you can keep your bounce rate very, very low all the way until checkout, you know that users are engaged. They're, number one, with your brand because they're browsing around. Number two, they're adding to cart, which means they're interested in your product. Number three means they're clicking checkout, which means, yes, I have money in my pocket and I'm willing to pay you. And if they're dropping off on checkout, then you can optimize for like these different payment methods. So I think those are like the number one reasons or the number one places in analytics that I would look to. If you don't have experience, you could totally hire an agency. But there's so much information out there on this, and there's a million other things you can analyze in Google Analytics, like conversion rates and figuring out which traffic sources have better conversion rates. But we'll kind of look at that for another video. So then I think once you have all of these insights from the different data pieces, you go back and improve the customer experience. So kind of what I've been talking about the whole time is actually improving the customer experience. Sometimes I work with prospects and customers that don't necessarily even look at this data. They just kind of make assumptions that, hey, the product page doesn't work because of X, Y, and Z. And all I can tell you from working with many brands is I see a lot of brands that don't necessarily have what would be historically considered a beautiful product page. Sometimes you go to very high-end brands that I think their sites are like almost impossible to use. And then I go to other brands that, I look at their site and I'm like, this doesn't really look that pretty, but their conversion rates are through the roof. So you just need to really focus on that end customer and making sure that their experience and their engagement with your brand and everything that you're doing with them is very, very high engagement. So I think that's on the front end of the site. And then the last piece that I want to talk about here is all right, now the customer actually did pay, right? You improve that experience and everything is great on the front end. But don't forget, just because you took their money doesn't mean that the experience ends there. That customer's experience is actually only halfway done. So the next piece is all right, now how am I going to get that item delivered to that customer? First of all, in the lowest latency or as fast as possible. Number two, once they do get it, what's kind of going to be their experience? So again, data comes into play here, and you might have to make sure you have the right technology, but you should be able to know what the SLA or the service level agreement is with the carriers and your customer that you're offering, right? So if the customer checks out and they expect to receive it in 2 days and they get it in 4, you already kind of ruined the experience based on that expectation. So number one, make sure that you have consistent SLAs and that's communicated to the customer in checkout. So if it's going to be ground shipping, tell them, it's going to be about 4 or 5 days. Just make sure that the customer knows so that they have that expectation. All right, I'm not going to get this until next week. And then make sure you're following up with those carriers, right? Just because they, USPS, UPS, FedEx tells you it's going to be there in 5 days. Did it get there in 5 days? Make sure that you have the technology to audit that. And then the last piece of this, and this is probably one of the hardest pieces to actually report on, and you can't necessarily get data, which is the point of this video. But once that customer opens the box, what's going to be their experience? The only way I think you can judge that experience is based on returns and refunds. So if you don't have a lot of people returning and refunding, I think you can try to assume that that's a pretty good experience. I mean, you could probably follow up via email marketing and ask them questions and offer them discounts to get their opinions, or like a net promoter score. How likely are you to refer this to a friend? Give us a rating from 1 to 10 and then see where people are rating. And then, once they rate, you can even ask them for feedback. A lot of people at least will rate you 1 to 10. Most won't actually go through and give you feedback. But that's a way that I think that an established brand can really improve their D2C experience. I see just a lot of problems when I look at established brands with their direct-to-consumer presence, and most of them are complaining about it not producing the revenue that they expect, and it's just, for lack of a better way of saying it, they're just doing it wrong. You need somebody that has the expertise to get into this space. So I hope this video has been helpful. It's really just using data points and slowly improving. I think the biggest piece here is test, review, and then iterate. A lot of times I see people just trying to change 100 things at once. In my opinion, you should change one thing at a time. Make sure you have pieces in place to test. There's, again, tools. Actually, Google Optimizes, which is part of kind of the analytics package, allows you to make very specific tests so that maybe 50% of your users will see one version of the site, another 50% of the users will see another version of the site. Let that run for 2 weeks. Let that run for 4 weeks. Don't just think that it's statistically significant when the first day the second version actually produces better results. It might just produce better results because it's the day you launched it. And you got to let it have some time, and make sure that you're not comparing that 45% of people checked out on version A and 55 checked out on version B. Is that really statistically significant? Probably not. But if you see something like 100% increase in one version from the other, then yes, that's probably something that you should iterate on and implement. So don't follow necessarily the lean startup approach where you're changing everything every day all the time. You're never going to know what worked in that scenario. So take it slow, learn, iterate, improve. And I think by following some of these methodologies and using data, you should be able to improve your D2C experience and actually see an increase in your bottom line. Hope that's been helpful. Looking forward to another episode of the D2C Academy.